this, I'm available to answer.
That's a great idea.
Engage.
All right. We're starting a new session. Our first speaker today in this session is Carol Gould. Her title is LBT and Self-Knowledge. As a bio, she's a professor of philosophy at Florida Atlantic University, soon to be Emerita, in Boca Raton, Florida. Her specialization, in which she's published widely, are ancient philosophy, aesthetics, philosophy of psychiatry. Some of her recent publications are at the crossroads of all three. She's currently completing a book called Glamour and Personhood, under contract with Bloomsbury. She has a forthcoming article on Iki, I don't know if I pronounced that right, for Japanese aesthetics area in which she works. She's certified both the individual and corporate level by the APA levels, and has started working with Elliot on certification for LBT. Several years ago, she had a small practice. My most consistent, she said, most consistent client being a CEO in Boca Raton.
Yeah, that was interesting. Okay, let's see if I'm going to try to share my screen. I know I can do this. Okay. No, uh-oh. Let's see. Oh, this is terrible. Excuse me. Let's see if it's in here. I have it behind this, so let me see if I can do that. No. Oh, here it is. Okay. Okay, can you all see it? Can anyone see it?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay. Yeah, forgive me, my computer was just running out of juice, so okay, now let's try. No, what is it doing? Well, this is catastrophic. Let me see. I just put share screen, right? And it's supposed to show what's on my screen. At least that's what it usually does. This is mortifying. Any suggestions?
Are you actually pressing share, clicking on share desktop once you hit share screen?
It doesn't have that option. Let's see.
There's nothing that says like desktop one.
Desktop one. No, this is a Mac. Is that?
That's what I'm on.
This has never happened to me before. Let's see if it's in.
I had a similar issue with the Mac, and if it says that you have to allow for the screen to be shared somewhere in your settings.
Oh, okay.
You have to do that first. But if you want, you can as well send the presentation to one of us and we can help.
Thank
you. Screen sharing.
Okay, is that okay with everyone? I'll talk a little bit before that. Whom shall I send it to?
You can send it to me via email.
Okay, and
here is my email address.
Okay.
I will do the screen sharing for you.
Oh, thank you. That's so good of you. Okay, so.
Thank you, Anka.
You are Anka. Can you spell your email, please?
Yes, I wrote it in the chat. It's anka.tiurian@yahoo.com.
Dot what?
.com.
Anka at, okay.
You have it in the chat just for copy and paste.
Yeah, okay, let's see. Let me go to the chat now. I am so sorry to take your time this way, everybody. Let's see. Oh, okay. Is Yahoo?
Yes.
Okay. This has absolutely never happened to me before. Okay. And now, for some reason, okay, let's see. Well, I'll tell you first what motivated my my talk. And okay. No, it's not. I wasn't able to copy and paste it. TIUEAN. Okay.
TIUREAN.
TIURAIN.
EAN.
EAN. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It took me about 15 minutes today to wrap my mind around the system preference thing, and I tried it with another computer.
Okay, here it goes.
Is that system preference or settings? Because I have a
I
Mac
think-
too.
Yeah, I think it's in settings. The Mac doesn't automatically share things unless you specifically mention you allow it.
Or isn't it the presenters, I mean the host like Sam and Elliot, who make you a co-host so that you can share?
No, it worked for the rest of us without being co-hosts, so
Okay,
we
thanks.
should be able to share.
okay. Otherwise, I'll send mine to you too.
Okay. I'm refreshing the page, but it hasn't arrived yet.
No, I guess. Oh, I see what happened. Okay. I'm trying it for a different email. So that was my university email. And okay, this one. Now you'll see when you get the PowerPoint, okay, here we go. Ah, okay, got on there. You should have it in a moment.
Yeah, got it.
You got it? Oh, thank you so much. Okay, great.
Yes, just a sec. To download it, and I'll bring it up in a second.
Okay, well, I have it on my screen. Okay, so the title of my talk is Logic-Based Therapy, Self-Knowledge, and I tossed in and Socratic Intellectualism. And I subtitled this Another Genesis Story. I don't know if is it there yet?
Yes.
Okay.
One moment.
Now, just to give you, by the way, the first slide, the print is very small. So for some reason, oh, okay, great. Now, it's been almost taken as doctrine that this mode of therapy is based on Stoicism. And something about that has puzzled me or troubled me, because for the Stoics, the goal of human life, or the goal of certainly philosophy, and which they considered therapy, is apatheia, what the Greeks called apatheia. And that is, that's an ambiguous term, because it could be lack of feeling, or, you know, it could be lack of suffering, lack of pain. But I think that the primary, for a variety of reasons, the primary meaning of that is really lack of feeling. And that's what the Stoics were really aiming for, you know, kind of contentment, where you don't, and actually, you know, if we think about it in ordinary parlance in English, you know, the idea is that it's to take things smoothly without reacting emotionally. And I think that that doesn't quite capture what LBT is about. And it occurred to me that actually another logic-based philosophy and therapy, in fact, it's sometimes accused of being anti-emotional, which I believe it is not, is Socratic intellectualism. Now, when I talk about Socratic intellectualism, I'm talking about the philosophical psychology in Plato's early dialogues, the early ones, not the later ones, the early ones. And whenever I refer to Socrates here, I'm really referring to the Platonic Socrates of the early dialogues. So allow me. Okay, we can go to the first slide. I'm going to give it two cases of shipwrecked lives. Okay, one is based on fiction, one is based on an actual person I know. And I think they're both helpfully illustrative. You know, one is the case of Dr. Paul Weston, who is the protagonist of an HBO show called In Treatment. I don't know if anyone has seen it, okay, or seen the Israeli version. And the second one I'm going to call, well, at first I was going to call him Dr. X, but I'm going to call him George. He's the doctor of philosophy and is a highly accomplished philosopher. And each is at a point, I'm taking you to a temporal point when each is facing a crisis of despair, a real calamity. Now, Dr. Paul Weston, takes his life astray by seeing himself in the fictional artwork that is a novel that his therapist has written. And George has taken himself, as you know, has led himself astray. Actually, he did something catastrophic by seeing himself through a distorted interpretation of his psychoanalyst remark in a couple of sessions. Now, Paul is a 50-something psychologist and psychoanalyst with a successful practice. He discovers that Gina, his trusted analyst, friend, former teacher, and former supervisor, psychoanalytic supervisor, has depicted him in a best-selling novel. And she shows him to be selfish and needy adolescent. And although she has written a roman à clef, his character is thinly disguised. He now reassesses himself as a husband, lover, father, and professional. And he finds himself lost at sea, helpless to navigate back on course. So in a panic, he first encourages his younger son to go to live with his mother and stepfather, even though the son had chosen to live with him. Then he decides to dismantle his practice, which has really benefited most of his patients, although, you know, rather tortuously, but, you know, that's the nature of the beast. But But the problem is that he remembers, and with Gina's reminding through this fiction, 2 clinical blunders, and they assume a magnitude that really makes all of his successful cases fade into the background. Now, George is an accomplished professional philosopher. I'm not sure he's still alive, and noted expert on Wittgenstein with a finely honed ability and high-level logic. Okay, he's divorced with 2 young adult daughters and ready for a new life partner. He consistently dated women he found appealing, even though he professed explicitly to know that they were either emotionally destructive or inappropriate in some other way. Now, either he would drop them, today, I guess the term would be ghost, or they him. Ultimately went on to marry a young woman who was the sister of a student, and she was decades younger, many decades younger, I think maybe 4. And he put her through law school, and before they married, he froze his sperm at her insistence. Now, her life improved. She actually became a judge. They had 2 children, but his life declined in every way you can imagine, professionally, physically, and financially. Now, before he tied the knot, he told his friends that he knew he shouldn't go through with it, but he didn't have the courage to break up. Okay, can we go to the next slide? Okay, now, both Paul and George feel as if they have succumbed to their passions and emotions, which means that they've acted from what philosophers call akrasia, or weakness of will. In Paul's case, he reacted to Gina's picture of him, even though he knew he was abandoning valuable goods in doing so. And there's a girlfriend also he abandons at the same time. George acts out of cowardice. Okay, both took an easy route rather than persisting in their resolve. Now, Socrates would say that both have acted from ignorance because akrasia never occurs. Now, before inspecting these cases more closely, let us consider the Socratic view, which many call the Socratic paradox. Now, can you think of a case in which someone wants to do X, but knows or believes that X is wrong? Now, X could be something moral or prudential, like have an affair with a subordinate. And we've been hearing a lot about that lately with the hashtag movement. Or X wants to take a hit of cocaine. Now, does believing a proposition like that cocaine is bad for me, or it's morally wrong for me to have an affair with a subordinate, can you believe that contradiction? But can you believe that those things are true, but still want to do them? Does believing a proposition guarantee that one will act on it? Usually we say, and most of us I think would say, that humans have frailties, weakness of will among them. And my gosh, we wouldn't have the whole body of Western literature that we do if that weren't the case. Now, okay, so Socratic intellectualism is basically the view that no one does wrong knowingly. Akrasia never occurs. How is this possible? Okay, Socrates gives a good answer for this, and I'm trying not to go over time. I worked last night to shorten it, so stop me, please, if I go on. But okay, everyone wants the good or pleasure, Socrates says, and he acts according to what, or they act according to what they believe that will be. So if person A has 2 conflicting desires, either moral or prudential, A will act on the one that A thinks best. And let's say that A thinks insider trading is wrong, but has some information that will allow A to make a killing on a stock. Or A believes that marrying B will ultimately make A unhappy. In either case, can A act contrary to this? That is it possible that A will be acratic? Now, our immediate reply is to say, of course it is. It happens all the time, including to us. So what on earth could Socrates mean? And, this became one of the central questions in Greek ethics after that. And Aristotle was not at all, he really struggled with this. Plato just changed his philosophical psychology in his middle dialogues. That's when he tripartitions the soul. But Aristotle really struggles with it because he knows that there's a sense in which Socrates is right, but he also knows that it's paradoxical. And Aristotle wanted to maintain intuitions, or what humans generally take to be obviously true, whenever he could, unlike Plato. Okay, he wanted to, quote, preserve the phenomena. Okay, next. Okay, so Socrates says that reason is never dragged around like a slave by desire or passion. And as I said, this becomes a central question. Now, according to A, one doesn't need to learn to control emotion or desire. Rather, A needs education. And the goal of Socratic education is twofold. And you can find this right in the Protagoras, although it seems to elude many readers of Plato. The goal of Socratic education is twofold: understanding the good and mastering what he calls science of measurement or calculation. Now, we all know that Socrates says, know thyself, okay? So following the famous Delphic oracle maxim. Okay, so what does that mean? For Socrates, understanding the good, not only for oneself as an individual, but also for humans more generally. So self-knowledge is twofold. His argument is, to me, fascinating and, I think tough. Okay, when we think of visual perception, we all know that it's perspectival. And he says so is temporal perception. And I don't know if anyone here has tried to, draw or is a studio artist, but if you have, you know that, we take these things for granted as we look at the visual world. In our visual field, something that looks quite small and it's in a distance can look much smaller than a small object that's close to us. So that if we have a small shrub or plant in front of us, if we were to draw it, we'd have to draw it as being bigger than the tall building in the back, that's far away. Okay, now, if we can, so just keep that in mind for a moment. If we can anticipate gratifying two desires, the one that will be gratified immediately, it's capable of being gratified immediately, will appear superior, more intense, and just better than the one that extends in time. Now, think of a patient with congestive heart failure who intensely desires a cigarette. Okay, the immediacy of and we all know that that's terrible thing for someone with that condition. Okay, the immediacy of the pleasure, the anticipated pleasure, looks better and more important than the cardiovascular health that she will enjoy over a longer period of time, extending far into the future, right? Okay, so of course, the cigarette seems far more valuable, okay? Now, we can go on. Okay, now what are the impediments to knowing that the cigarette is not more valuable, and that because this is why what people call, Socrates says, look, people are just misnaming it. It's a problem of language. It's not giving in to the passions. It's just miscalculating. It's a problem of measuring. So and we have to know ourselves to know when we're inclined to make these mistakes. Okay, so not knowing, our impediments to self-knowledge are, first of all, not knowing that we don't know. That's a no-brainer in Socrates. Misguided idea of the good. What is the good for me or for human beings? And reasoning from false premises about oneself and or the world. Now, according to Socrates, and I want to just refer you to a dialogue where I think this is magnificently shown, and also with great irony, if I may, and a tad of humor. Self-knowledge is painful and arduous, and it requires perseverance and a higher order true belief that one should persevere. So suppose you want that cigarette so passionately, okay, and I've seen smokers who they seem to be going mad with desire, okay, and yet they're trying not to smoke. Okay, so it's a simplistic example, but not only do they not have to, so you might say, well, look, how can knowing that that's bad for them make them persevere if they, really want that cigarette or something more, you can think of something juicier, I'm sure. But what Socrates is, what we can ferret out from that dialogue, okay, is that we need to have a higher order true belief that one ought to persevere in difficult cases. And this dialogue is about courage. Now, the problem is that, we resist resisting the cigarette because we might not have that higher order true belief in place, or it might not have become dispositional to our characters. Okay. Now, in Freudian terms, this is totally understandable because self-exploration, which Socrates tries to get his interlocutors to engage in, self-exploration often meets with resistance. And I think that this is something that Freud recognized in Plato, that he found valuable. I mean, Freud often, let me start by saying, Freud rarely credits the philosophers who influence him, or even other analysts. But he does say that Plato is very influential in his thought, and we're inclined to say, well, Plato divides the soul into three parts, Socrates does, but if you look at the two models, they're very different, the Platonic and the Freudian model, the tripartite model. But that kind of resistance that Freud talks about, we also see in the Socratic dialogues with Socrates and his interlocutors. Okay, now, so Socrates, in my opinion, endorses something like, or an early version, let me say, logic-based therapy. Whatever elements of LBT one finds in Aristotle, and we know that, Professor Cohen has drawn our attention to these things in his book, What Would Aristotle Do? Has its source in Socratic intellectualism. And that's why I mentioned in the beginning that Aristotle really wrestles with Socratic, the Socratic paradoxes in book 7 of the Nicomachean Ethics. Now, what Professor Cohen in his book calls, in his books, calls the willpower muscle, and he referred to it in his talk earlier today, is for Socrates that higher order belief about perseverance. Okay, so the Socratic view, I believe, is closer to LBT than is Stoicism, because it allows for emotions. In fact, Socrates even begins by the section of the Protagoras by saying, let me start by acknowledging that everybody desires pleasure. Everyone wants the good. The problem is we have a misguided idea of the good. We can go on to the next slide, please. Okay. Okay, now Paul and George, and I put here not the Beatles, because I realized as I was writing this, that those are two names of two of the Beatles, and fallacies of behavioral and emotional rules. And so I used Professor Cohen's model. And I would say in Paul's case, Dr. Paul Weston, his emotion is self-contempt. Okay, he feels utterly degradation. Okay, the object of his emotions is his set of actions towards two of his patients and his family. The judgment, or what on this model is called the rating. I am worthless as a man and as a therapist. Now, I put this in terms of a practical syllogism, and we heard about practical syllogisms earlier, and it's a very puzzling concept, and because Aristotle says that the conclusion of a practical syllogism is an action or a set of actions. Okay, now he says, Paul says, if Gina, his analyst, therapist, friend, and even became marriage counselor for a couple of sessions, if Gina portrays me as inadequate and selfish, I am undeserving of my career and the significant others in my life, my children, my wife, my new lover, etc. Because his wife divorces him. Gina portrays me as inadequate and selfish. Then the action that follows is that he abandons his practice and people who love him. Okay, can we go on? Okay, thank you.
You have
Now,
roughly 15 minutes.
I have what?
Roughly 15 minutes.
And that's for the discussion too, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, now Paul doesn't question Gina's narrative authority in the novel. He accepts her depiction because he recalls in retrospect having made a couple of clinical misjudgments. And one of them was actually at Gina's encouragement. He crossed a slippery erotic boundary with a patient, and which she encouraged him to do. Not only did she urge him to, quote, go with her, she did so knowing that his marriage was at a very fragile point. Okay, and his wife was already jealous. As Plato points out, the artist holds a mirror to nature, but Paul doesn't consider that the mirror could be a distorting one, and that no reflection gives a complete view of the object. An image mirrors the appearance of an object only from one particular perspective, one of innumerable points in space and time. So it can have has an imperfect service and give us a mediated view. Okay, so it's reflecting us through this mediation of this interpretation. And similarly with the literary narrative. Now, Paul doesn't have the receptors to see himself from any perspective other than Gina's, nor does he have the necessary self-regard or sufficiently tuned critical faculties to evaluate her portrayal. Now, I talk here about Paul's committing the cardinal fallacy of damnation and so forth, but he accepts only Gina's view and arguing in what arguably engages in what Professor calls jumping on the bag wagon. bag lady, bag wagon, okay, bandwagon. Socrates would urge Paul to use the art of measurement, the science of measurement. Now, in assessing that image in the novel, Paul lacks what Aristotle calls phronesis, which is the skill of using reason to assess particular situations to figure out the best course of action. Okay, so his lack of self-knowledge is really what doesn't allow him to appraise his past honestly or to transform himself fruitfully. Okay, so I'm going to defend, as I say here, a widely unpopular, widely attacked view, and that is that Plato was right about literature having little, if any, cognitive value or possibility to improve us morally. Okay, only careful logical assessment with a reflective, broad-minded guide can Paul acquire virtue and perhaps resist the urge to give up. Now, Paul's emotions must not be dismissed or denied on the Socratic view, but instead transformed so that he feels the self-regard necessary for courageously embarking on this quest. And this is an essential aspect of moral education. And as I say here, time does not permit us to analyze George in the same detail. I think there's another slide here. No, end of slideshow. Okay, great. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so any questions?
All right, okay, you're ready for questions. So please try to keep your questions short. And I think I saw Elliot. Do you have a question?
Yes, thank you for that eye-opening discussion. I really found that interesting because I didn't quite think of it that way, but most definitely that is a problem. That is lack of self-knowledge, and LBT does expose the premises that need to be understood in order to overcome that lack of self-knowledge. I guess when you say that it's different, it's more compatible with Socratic intellectualism versus Stoicism. The part of Stoicism that influenced me was kind of methodological, and that's the aspect that it's not the events themselves, and this is actually pretty much that was the basis for REBT. It's not the events themselves that upset us, but it's one's beliefs that do that. Why would that be incompatible with the idea of self-discovery here through finding out the premises that you're mistaken about and ultimately correcting them?
Well, I think that there are two reasons, and those are great questions. And we've talked about this a little bit, I think, very briefly. But I think one thing has to do with the Stoic view of the emotions. I mean, as I said, the goal of human life is to achieve the state of apatheia, and that can be achieved by realizing that emotions are really false beliefs. Negative emotions are false beliefs. And so Socrates, I think, has a much richer, or Plato has a much richer view of the range of human emotions and their role in our lives. And also, with Stoicism, that apatheia makes sense as lack of emotion or feeling, because they believe that, when they talk about the human being living according to nature, they really mean the nature of reality, which they take to be rationally structured. And so that that I think is the problem, you know, that metaphysical view and how they tie their philosophical therapy, so to speak, into it, because they saw themselves as healers of the soul, especially the middle and later Stoics.
Mhm.
And
Exactly.
so, but the problem is that the universe is, you know, just, it has this rational order to it. It's a metaphysical order. And if to live in accordance with it means to, in a sense, purge yourself of emotion. And that's the difference, I think, the important difference between the Stoics and, say, the Epicureans, also healers of the soul, contemporaneous healers of the soul. So I think that is an important part of it. And so I think that the Socratic view is much richer, and that if we look at his practice in the dialogue, he's really practicing what you describe in your and others as a kind of logic-based therapy. And Plato rejects it. I think Aristotle returns to it. And many of the things in Aristotle, I think Socrates anticipates. And interestingly, all of the post-Aristotelian philosophers, and perhaps Aristotle himself, although he doesn't accept everything, he accepts a lot of it, but all of the three Hellenistic schools or post-Aristotelian schools all claim to be the true intellectual heirs of Socrates. And but the Socratic view, I think, is, as I said, it's richer. We can really mine it for a lot of philosophical gold, let's say.
Right. And I would accept
The emotions and you know, moral knowledge.
Right, and I would accept the that idea as well, that that there is a richer blend of emotions outside of the Stoics, and specifically too in LBT, when we look at the virtue theory, the virtues are really emotive. You know, when we look at some of the emotions there, like empathy is a virtue in LBT, and courage is a virtue, and a number of virtues are not just not being excited or not being exuberant and just being accepting the world and without excitement or passion. They're quite positive and uplifting, and so to identify emotion, or to assume that emotions are just sort of gritting and bearing it, and getting through something, would be incompatible with LBT, which emphasizes the loftier kinds of emotions that one can aspire to. So I think from that perspective, I see exactly where you're heading, but I do accept the methodological concept that Epictetus announced, and that was that it's not the events that upset us, but that the thoughts and that you have. But that's perfectly consistent, I think, with your interpretation. And so
I think so. And I love Epictetus, but Socrates says the same thing. I mean, just if you look at the Crito, for example,
yeah.
and the Platonic Socrates,
Uh-huh.
he says to Crito, he said, the many can't hurt you,
Mhm.
et cetera.
Mhm.
But which is probably not true, but but it's there. I think that that's really the kernel of what Epictetus is saying, that we can find it there. And similarly with Seneca, who did not live consistently with his principles, but Epictetus arguably did. And I think actually Epictetus deviates a little bit from some of the other Stoics, but I don't know, we can talk about that another time.
Sure thing. Thank you.
But thank you. I agree with you, though, that methodologically, they're extremely useful.
Thanks.
I need more of it.
We have a quick note from Antonio.
Yeah, just it's always regarding, I mean, this reading of the Stoics. Actually, you're right when you're saying, okay, apatheia is the goal, but there is a slightly nuance of meaning different. I mean, it's more intended in the way of non-affection, not non-emotion. So affection in a more general sense of what is affecting, so it's causing a negative effect on reasoning. This becomes slightly clearer in later developments. I mean, because if you take, for example, a keyword from Chrysippus, is the attainment of eucrasia. So it's like the good mixture. And then this plays a key role, I mean, because he recognized that there are some eupatheiae, so there are some good emotions that actually do not affect our reasonability. So as long as they do not affect the reasonability, it's not that emotions are completely banned. This also is really explained in this book. I'm just sending the link. It's a reconstruction of Chrysippus on affection made from Telemann. And he's explaining this thing really carefully because it's explained properly the title. Because the title of the book was Peripathon, so it's like on emotions. But he decided to translate on affections properly to specify this nuance of meaning.
Yeah, I think that Chrysippus is slightly different case. He's an early Stoic. Action.
Yeah, it's after Zeno, Cleanthes, and Chrysippus, yeah.
But it was, but that's a little more complex because, yeah, there's no disturbance and there's still an emphasis on a kind of indifference, invulnerability. The idea of Stoicism is to make yourself invulnerable to fortune. Remember, we're supposed to not care about anything that's not according to us. You see, and so.
Yeah.
But I think that, but I see what you're saying, and I think that that what you're saying about Chrysippus is certainly applies to Epictetus as well.
Yeah, this was the thing. I would just want to say that there are some shades. I mean, it's not that Stoics are completely banning the role of emotion. I mean, it's just as long as the problem is when they affect the way of reasoning. So this was the thing.
Well, and also when they make you unhappy, because I mean, there's the whole world. I mean, the world was going crazy. It was a world of very similar to ours. It was like on a mini scale. Or
exactly.
Globalization. I mean, they were experiencing globalization, fluidity of boundaries, fear about values and all that. And there was a lot of anxiety, a lot of uncertainty, anxiety, and so forth. Just as there is now.
Absolutely. Yeah, there is a very good parallel.
But you're absolutely right. I mean, the word apatheia is ambiguous. It has, it's not monolithic, and I see what you're saying. Thank you.
Thank you as well. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for that presentation. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the questions. We're going to have to move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Antonio Fadda. His presentation title is Wisdom Through Images, Some Philosophical Antidotes from Tagore's Sādhanā, The Realization of Life. A little bit about Antonio. He's still looking for his road. After graduating in religious study, Southeast Asian branch at the University of Padua, he spent several years working abroad as a CSA and as process improvement specialist for Amazon's Alexa data services. Looking for a change, he received LBC primary certification in 2020 and moved back home with the idea to promote philosophical practice in his native region. Notwithstanding the efforts, he is forced to set aside the idea for financial reasons. Currently, he lives in Sofia, Bulgaria. During the night, works as inquiry specialist for an e-gaming corporation, spending days and free time to research independently on philosophical topics, currently doing paperworks and project drafts to apply for PhD at a local university, hopefully. Thank you.
Yeah.
Right, Antonio.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. I prepared a long presentation, but I would just like to tell me when we miss like 5 minutes from the end, and I will cut it up and we'll go directly to the conclusions. Okay. Okay. So wisdom tree image, philosophical antidotes from Rabindranath Tagore, Sādhanā, the realization of life. We may see here a manuscript page of Rabindranath Tagore, and he had this really peculiar style, so he was adding words to images, and this was really amazing. So what we will see is we'll do a first introduction on putting a methodological problem, so the problem of the problematic use of image in philosophical arguments. Then just some small information about the author that we choose, like Rabindranath Tagore, and about the book, Sādhanā. And we'll see some excerpts of this book as a case study for our main problem. And then we'll have some final remarks and statement. So, jumping in, let me just check if I can, because I got the controls up and cannot manage to. Do you see the entire thing or you see the title cut? Ah, okay. That's from here. Okay. So the problematic use of imagery in philosophical arguments. Let's start with some definitions. What we would call imagery. First of all, imagery is visual symbolism or figurative language that evokes a mental image or some kind of sense impression. And this is possible, especially for figurative language. Most of the imagery relies on the analogy. And for analogy, we have two definitions. We could say a broad definition and a stricter logical one. As a broad definition, we may define an analogy as the cognitive transfer of information from an analog or a source, so a particular subject, to another particular subject, which is called the target. How does analogy work? I got a short clip for you. It's immediate. It's from the movie Cogliani Scazzi. This is an example of analogy. People are going on the stairs at mad speed, as the same as sausage in a sausage factory. This is to imply the metaphor of the society as a meat grinder, for example. From a logical point of view, we can define analogy as an inference of an argument from one particular to another particular. And this is something this is the difference between other form of reasoning like deduction, induction, or abduction. And in this, at least one of the premises or the conclusion is general rather than particular in nature. We use analogy every day, and actually we have tons of figures of this. Based on analogy, there are exemplifications, comparisons, metaphors, similes, allegories, and parables, even some subtypes of metonymy. And you may see here an image of how it works. So you got a source word and you got a target word, and it's simply the transfer from one of the other. And our daily language is really filled of these figures. So sometimes we don't even realize it. For example, just got terms like pay attention, hogwash, snake oil. These are all examples of figurative language. Analogy-based argument played an important role in ancient philosophy. Just say an example, you may think about like Plato, Buddha, or Lao Tzu. They had really tons of images, myths, and other kind of things. But it seemed that on later development of philosophy, their use was limited. I mean, imagery in later development covered just the role of exemplification or mental experiments. And this is due mainly for two reasons. What we may call, even if improperly, the anti-metaphysics crusade. So, I mean, the trend to banish from philosophical toolset whatsoever have even the slightest link with a kind of thinking of religion, poetry, or similar discipline without the same logic rigor. And the second factor, which are actually two factors, but they're intertwined, is the categorization of analogy as a subtype of induction and the triumph of deduction in scientific method. The first one is due to authors with a huge interest in induction, like Ibn Taymiyyah, Francis Bacon, and John Stuart Mill. Well, the second one, of course, I mean, when deduction became the prominent instrument of the scientific method, accordingly, analogy shifted just to a secondary road, just a subsidiary clarification to deductive arguments. And if we ask ourselves why, is that the main philosophical concern here is the phobia to fall out from the clear distinction traced from Aristotle between dialectics and rhetorics. In other words, analogy-based imagery is really powerful, but there is a concrete risk that arguments based on this may shift from simply being a proof of truth to being a mere tool of persuasion, regardless of their truth value. It is, of course, a comprehensible fear, and it's something that would annihilate every kind of philosophical effort, but it leaves nonetheless some questions. With another image, can it be that out of fear we may have thrown out the baby with the bathwater? So our main question is there a way to use analogy-based imagery for a philosophical antidote without falling into this kind of disqualifying criticism? We choose some cases to illustrate and to study this problem, and we choose an author which is not considered a philosopher, but it was a polymath. Rabindranath Tagore was one of the most famous names of the last century India, and his interests were really various, and is known mostly to the world for his literary work. Bengali speakers say that in translation these are just a pale shadow of the meaning richness that they have in the original language. But nonetheless, even in translation, they are really wonderful, and they attracted the attention of the West, so that in 1913 he won the Nobel Prize for Literature. His most famous work is his poetical masterpiece, Gitanjali, which is an offer of song. He was a supporter of the Indian independence cause, but he had a peculiar vision for Indian future, which was a kind of blend between tradition and modernity. And for this reason, he used the royalties of his work, as well as some private resources, to establish a new educational facility, which is surviving today, is the Vishva Bharati University, which applies the traditional teaching frame to higher education. The excerpts that we're going to see comes from this book, Sādhanā, The Realization of Life, coming properly in the year of the Nobel Prize. It is a peculiar work where the boundary between philosophy and poetry is really difficult to distinguish.
Nice.
Anything in this ocean anything in it is really an ocean of meaning, starting from the title. Sādhanā, it's a Sanskrit word which we may roughly translate as a discipline, or it indicates the series of things that we are doing daily in thoughts, ritual, practice, and all to realize and to develop our life. But I mean, its roots from Sanskrit are open to really tons of different etymologies. We could say, just think about, for example, sadhu is the word that still we're using for to indicate, we could say, the holy man's in India. Or dana, it means richness. And sa, sometimes it's like with. So it can be like a kind of discipline that is bringing you to develop your inner richness. And the main theme of Tagore's vision is always the same, the complex relationship between the one and the many, we could say, between the peculiar one and the many shades of the whole one who encompass everything. But he explores this theme in myriads of variations, recursions, and connections. And the main goal is to show a world that it's simultaneously changed and remains. Everything in it, it's a never-ending renewal of existence and life. And this universe is so wide and so renewing that it's a spring of goodness and bedazzlement at the same time. Sādhanā is divided in 8 chapters concerning some specific thematics like realization of self, the problem of evil, realization of love. But it's one of those works where actually you can just simply open a random page and start from there and move it wherever you want, and everything will gather meaning in the end. So now that we introduced this, we'll just go to our to see some excerpts, and to see how actually it works, the idea of imagery for, as let's say, philosophical antidote. And the first one is this passage, and to perspective on a journey. We can look upon a road of two different points of view. One regards it as dividing from the object of our desire. In that case, everything we encounter on this journey is something attained by force in face of obstruction. While the other way to look at the road is to see it as something that leads us to our destination. And as such, every step in it is a part of our goal. Every step we do is already the beginning of our attainment, and by journeying over it, we can only gain that which is itself offered to us. We can see clearly in this passage that actually the first way to look at this road is the one leading to fallacies, and the second one is the one leading to virtues. If we look at things just as obstacles to overcome to reach a goal, most of the time we will fall prey of demanding perfection, and when things don't go as we expect, we can easily resort to manipulation, thinking that the end justifies the mean. And if we fail even with manipulation, we can easily resort to constipation or damnation to find an alibi of what we failed of. While on the opposite side, if we see every step in a road as something new that we're gaining, even if it's not our final effort, we will be metaphysically secure. We won't resort to any form of manipulation, but on the contrary, if we see someone with some problems, we'll be more disposed to empowerment. And at the same time, we will be more disposed to respect and to self-control. The earth, the water and light, fruits and flowers are not mere physical phenomena to be turned into use and then left aside. Everything is necessary in the attainment of an ideal perfection. This is not personal, it's like an ideal perfection of the universe. And everything is necessary as every note in it is necessary to complete the symphony. This is a really wonderful metaphor, although recurring in other expressions as well. And it's the idea that there is a word harmony and there is nothing that doesn't have sense in it. It's kind of reframing, we could say, of the principle of Leibniz, that everything's got a reason. And if we fail to see this, we will easily belittle the others and the word, and we will damn them, or we may be easily convinced that our opinions are what matters, they're always right, and they're above all the other things. These are the ones that have value. So the acknowledgement that everything has a reason is a powerful antidote to stimulate respect and to stimulate empowerment and empathy. When a man does not realize his kinship with the word, he lives in a prison house whose walls are alien to him. That's the wonderful thing of the imagery itself. I mean, because it explains exactly, I mean, with a single image, which is the concept. When we do not realize that we are one together with the word, that we need to communicate with the word and to enjoy it, it's like we are in a prison. Our self becomes a prison, and this is the easiest way to fall prey of constipation, because we will tend to justify that there's nothing that we can change. That's how we are, that's ourself, and there's no escape. And as well, for the words revolts around me, we will thinking that there is nothing else besides the word of our opinion. This is another wonderful metaphor. A man must realize the wholeness of his existence is placed in the infinite. He must know that, hard as he may strive, he can never create his honey within the cell of his hive, for the perennial supply of his life food is outside their wall. He must know that when man shuts himself out from vitalizing and purifying touch of the infinite, and falls back upon himself for his sustenance and his healing, then he goads himself into madness, tears himself into shreds, and eats his own substance. That's the thing. When we're prisoner of, let's say, of ourselves, we're trying to resort to this irrational value of complete autarky. but we're not producing the thoughts, the substance, and all the other things that nurture our body and our spirit. We need to look outside. And if we don't, we easily fall prey of damnation, because we think that we got all that we need. We don't need the others. We don't need the word, and we can blame them. We can belittle them. And we got a huge spur towards demanding perfection, especially perfection of achievements. And of course, we resort as constipation, as I was saying, to justify that we cannot do more, that this is what we are and nothing can be changed. On the contrary, realizing that we depend from the word to sustain ourselves and to find the things that nurture us, this will allow us to cultivate all the opposite virtues. And what happens when we are unable to see this connection with the whole, with the word? Our simplicity, our simplicity becomes squalid. I mean, our wealth is just the attempt to look for something more extravagant. And in this case, we are just slave of our appetites. And this is a really powerful image. I mean, the appetites are depicted as the fiddle playing a music, and our feet cannot stop, and are just conditioned to play and to move at the same rhythm of our appetites are dictating to us. This is something that falls perfectly for bandwagon syndrome, because most of the time we don't realize that the desire to get the other approval, to do what the other do, and all, is just simply leading our way, and it's without us being conscious of which are the steps that we're doing, or without deciding. This is easily retorted to damnation as well, because our appetites will lead us to draw us fear of things that are good, things that are bad, people that are good, people that are bad, and of course to manipulation, because everything will be worth in order to reach the appetite. So when we realize that in this kind of situation we are not controlling the appetite, we are not feeding the desires, but desires are controlling us, actually this is the first step to develop authenticity, to develop respect, and to develop empowerment. It is dire distraction for him, for man, for human being, when he envelopes his soul in a dead shell of callous habits, and when the blind fury of work whirls around him like an Eden dust storm, shutting out the horizon. This indeed kills the very spirit of being, which is the spirit of comprehension. And when a man tries to raise himself to eminence by pushing and jostling all others, to achieve a distinction by which he prides himself to be more than everybody else, there he is alienated from the spirit. Our real, we could say, our natural tendency would be the one to live in harmony with the word. This is something that may recall really Stoics or other views. And what kills this is the fact that our habits becomes a shell, becomes something that is just simply shielding us and protecting us, but at the same time limiting the kind of interaction that we may have with the word, and limiting, first of all, I mean, the spirit of comprehension, our will to comprehend how things are really. So this applies perfectly to fallacies like the bandwagon syndrome, the demanding perfection, damnation as well, for the reasons we were saying before, and manipulation, because we are driven from these to simply think that these kind of things are natural, are normal, and this is what should be. While in fact, I mean, we cannot see that it shouldn't be so, because we are enveloped in this shell. That which is past is hidden in life, and that which is to come is hidden as well. Mere appearance and disappearance are on the surface like the waves of the sea, but life which is permanent knows no decay or diminution. This may have a really, say, metaphysical point of view, but at the same time it can be interpreted even in a more practical way. Especially the first sentence, I mean, falls really great for the fallacies of damnation, if damnation is due to, especially self-damnation, if this is linked to something that we perceive as a blame or a fault in the past, or dutiful worrying, because I mean, in this case, we are just worrying about what will be the future even before the future will come. We're just worrying from the possibility, and as Seneca said, if someone worries before something evil happens, is already suffering before the object of suffering appears. So the fact that the past is gone and that the future is not yet is really one of the most powerful antidotes for these two fallacies. As I was saying, if our obsession, if our irrational drive is due to an obsession with the past or with the future. This is personally one of my favorites because it's really wonderful. It is our nature to have problems and to solve them. And the burdens of man are many, too numerous for him to carry. But he knows that by adopting a system, he can lighten the weight of his load. Whenever they feel too complicated and unwieldy, he knows that it is because he has not been able to hit upon the system, which would set everything in place and distributed the weight evenly. This search for a system is really a search for unity, for synthesis, we'd say. It is our attempt to harmonize the heterogeneous complexity of outward materials by an inner adjustment. This is why I put a winch here. And it is properly the best image. Sometimes we tend to ignore complexity. So, for example, constipation comes many times. I mean, as a people may be somehow aware that a change may be possible, but there are other fears or other things that they're leading them to believe that it's the easiest way to be constipated, to be that this cannot be changed. That's the thing. And for reporting fallacies, it's the same thing. So a wonderful antidote is, this is a wonderful antidote because it's saying we shouldn't just simply retort to the easiest way, like to oversimplify reality or to rely on the easiest probability to calculate or on the first conjectures that we have, because reality is complex. We just need to remember all the time that complexity can be managed. We just need to find the right system to do it. And whenever we do it, we will have the disposition to invent and to try to do it. While otherwise, if we don't think it's possible, if we think it's just a too heavy burden, we just leave it. To understand anything is to find in it something which is our own, and it is the discovery of ourself outside us which make us glad. And this relation of understanding is partial, but the relation of love is complete. Love is the highest bliss that man can attain through. For through it alone, he truly knows that he is more than himself, and that he is at one with the all. This is really wonderful, because there is a direct link in Tagore's view between love and understanding. What drives us towards knowledge, towards the will to understand, is the fact that when we understand something, we don't just simply get something that is outside and is not related to us, but we understand something when we find ourselves in it, in some way, in some part, in some aspect. That's the thing. And that's why love, in his view, is considered as the next step. Love is the kind of will of understanding led to the uttermost step, where we actually not only are willing to find ourselves in the other, but we are willing to do it giving away every other kind of reluctance we may say that we may have. And this is a great antidote for damnation, because if we damn the others and we renounce to understand them, the other and the word, at the same time we're not just renouncing to understand the others and the word. We're renouncing to understand a huge part of ourselves. And this, of course, is related, is cascading to the world revolves around me and to constipation as well, because it's the fact that we're renouncing to think that there may be other ways to improve our opinions, understanding the word, and we're renouncing to think that there is some way that we can improve the kind of our virtues of self-control. So temperance, patience, tolerance, and that's it. And this is another great metaphor, and it recalls a verse from the Upanishad, which goes in the same direction of the passage we saw. It's not that thou lovest thy son because thou desirest him, but because thou desirest thine own soul. It's the same message. So it's like we don't love the others just because desire the others, but because we desire our own soul to be nearer with the other. And this love is something that gives a completely new perspective on life. But at the same time, this is the powerful warning of Tagore, it ceases to do so if it loses their elasticity. What happens is that sometimes from love we step directly to a kind of suffocating dynamics. This is when our friendship becomes exclusive, our family is selfish and inhospitable, our nation insular and aggressively inimical to other races. And this is the key metaphor. It's like putting a burning light with a sealed enclosure. I mean, the light, it's powerful, it's great, it's shining, but at the same time it's suffocated from poisonous gases. These accumulate and they will smother the flame. So even if there was a good flame before, all these kind of things are simply tending to suffocate and to let everything go off the rail. And this applies to all this kind of fallacies that we may see. It applies to damnation. So when we resort to damnation, because we perceive in the other an obstacle, we could say, towards the object of our desire, so we tend to belittle them or to try to disqualify them in the view of the others in order to keep the object of our desire. And we see it in dutiful worrying, because I mean, the main drive at the beginning, of course, is the one of having the best for the people we love. But when we're really at the point that we're worrying constantly about it, this becomes oppressive, and our good intention shifts easily. The intention remains good, but at the same time, the results is not. How much time do we have still?
You have roughly 15 minutes.
15. Oh, okay. Okay, I will be able to give some more something more. I thought that I was already running out of time. And this, as we were saying, applies, of course, even to manipulation, to constipation, and awfulizing. When these are driven from what we were saying, from the kind of love that transforms itself in a smothering gas. This is another great metaphor. This we can do by winning mastery over ourselves, by knowing that the worldly losses and physical death can take nothing away from the truth and greatness of our soul. This is really stoic. And the metaphor is great. The chick knows when it breaks through the self-centered isolation of its egg that the hard shell which covered it so long was not really a part of his life. The shell is a dead thing. It has no growth. It affords no glimpses whatsoever of the vast beyond that lies outside it. However pleasantly perfect and round it may be, it must be given a blow to it. It must be burst through, and thereby the freedom of light and air can won, and the complete purpose of the bird life can achieved. And this applies wonderfully to constipation and awfulizing, because it stimulates the will to move further and the will to break the shell that until this moment is constituting, we could say, the border of our safe corner. That's the thing. When we say we cannot think differently, we cannot act differently, or I cannot feel something different than what I feel, we're just closing ourselves inside the shell. But if we want to grow, if we want to realize the purpose of our life, we need to break the shell, as the chick does, because it can be comfortable inside it, but it knows that it has to become a bird, and it knows that in order to do it, it needs to break the shell. And that's the same thing for awfulizing. When we think that something is the worst thing that ever happened, and all, in fact, we're just clinging to this. We're clinging to the fact that this is really bad, this is a catastrophe, I will never be able to change this, I will never be able to recover or to move towards this. It's just simply a passive sheltering ourselves behind the disgrace, because it's weird, but it works in this way. So courage means this. Courage means the ability to break the shell, which is covering our actual situation, and move forward. This is taken from the third chapter, which is the one on the realization of, related to the problem of evil. And it's really great because it's a evil cannot arrest the course of life on the highway and rob it of its possession. Evil too has to pass on, as everything has to pass on. And it has to grow into good. It cannot stand and give battle to all. And as it is, man does not really believe in evil. We could say we cannot believe that evil is permanent and that it will not pass. Just as we cannot believe that the violin strings have been purposely created to the exquisite torture of discordant notes. That's the thing. I say, although the aid of statistics, it can mathematically be proved the harmony of discord is far greater than the opportunity of discord is greater than the one of harmony. And so this applies to lots of fallacies, like to the awfulizing, to damnation, and especially to the reporting fallacies, because whenever we have this kind of fixed judgment, okay, this is evil, there will always be evil, it will stay like this, and evil will never pass, we're simply renouncing to find the courage, as we were saying before, to break the shell and to move towards realization. We're renouncing to find the courage to, we're renouncing to respect the things, first of all, and the word, because we're simply saying, okay, if something can do something evil, this means that it's been created for this, which is absurd. That's that everything can have a good or a bad use. Everything can lead to potentially damaging things. So it's like a soap. I can just trip on a soap bar and fall on the ground and break my neck. But this doesn't mean that soap are evil. Soap bars are evil. That's the thing. It's simply the wrong use at the moment. Yeah, I had tons of other anecdotes, but I think that this will prove the case, so I will jump straight to the conclusion because I wouldn't like to go out of time. Eventually, if you want, I can just pass the presentation, and if someone is interested in reading the others as well. So as final remarks, I just did a small table. If we think about the small selection of arguments that we had and the arguments used in LBT, we can summarize pros and cons of more theoretical deductive arguments, we could say, and the analogy-based imagery in philosophical practice. We may see that there are two huge drawbacks. The first one is the deductive rigor. If we consider them as based on analogy, of course, all these kind of arguments will be devoid of deductive rigor, because it's a movement from a particular to particular, so it's not a case of deduction. And another drawback is the fact that it's what I call situational proximity of conceptualization. The analogy, as we said, moves from a source to a target object. And this pertains to different order of reality. They are not linked to the same deductive law. And so this means that actually the target of the analogy can be really distant from the one of from the source. This is something that is not happening with deductive arguments, where actually, if we choose an example to justify a deduction, this will be, of course, nearer, because it will be choosing something that falls under the same deductive law. But at the same time, we have two benefits. The first one is the representational strength. So it's the fact that analogy-based imagery can be more effective in conveying a message, because it gives the opportunity to sample with entities of different order of reality, even outside the same deductive flow. And at the same time, another wonderful benefit is the fact that while not necessary, there can be imagery, analogy-based imagery arguments which are maybe not so stimulating, but in general, it has more opportunity to use image from a wider pool to with an emotional effectiveness as well. As a conclusive statement, we may say that we know that LBT practice is grounded on sound deductive reasoning. That's the thing. I mean, we're trained to recognize when there are not sound deductive reasoning and to refute this. So we can say that we cannot use analogy-based imagery arguments in the refutation phase. In the refutation phase, it must be really strictly deductive. But in the following steps, in the search for a philosophical antidote, once that we have identified a virtue, analogy-based imagery can effectively support, under certain conditions, the strive towards the cardinal virtue. And its power, as we were saying, it lies in the ability to bridge theoretical arguments with practical events in the world in a wider way. The analogy target, as we say, is almost never directly dependent from the same deductive law that covers the source. However, the correlation between the target and the source widens the pools of image available, and this offers myriads of tools to stimulate the counselor's reason in a creative and positive way. I would just like to quit this presentation with a final remark, with a quote from Tagore, and it can be interpreted as an exhortation to a comprehensive knowledge. And it says, all our poetry, philosophy, and science, art, and religion are serving to extend the scope of our consciousness towards higher and larger spheres. Not necessarily metaphysically, not necessarily in a religious way, but I mean, it's the idea to extend our consciousness. That's the thing. I say, it is why, because man does not acquire rights through occupation or larger space, it doesn't acquire rights through external contact, or we may add through accumulation of wealth, but his rights extend only so far as he is real, as he feels that he is real, and he feels that his reality is measured by the scope of his consciousness. And that's all from my side. I hope you liked it and it was not boring.
It was very good. It's very good. We'll jump right into questions, and Maria is first in line. Ready for you?
You're on mute.
Sorry. Okay. No, there were a lot of things in my own practice. I use metaphor and analogy like all the time because I think it can speak to a person, if it does, in such a personal, deeply personal way that anything reasonable or through reason cannot. Something can click for them in a way, otherwise it's intellectual and they say, yeah, I guess you're right. But it has to click on a much deeper level, make sense on a much deeper level. And I think analogy and metaphor do that. You were talking about the fiddle of appetites. I'm presently living actually, the book called Lust for Life, and it's a book by Irving Stone about the life of Vincent van Gogh, Dutch painter. And he also talks about many of the other artists in that time period, Cézanne and Gauguin and so on. And I mean, they were all madmen. They were really, there was no sanity.
Yeah, they had this extreme drive, actually.
Yes, the fiddle of appetites was just completely off the wall. But so I was thinking, they're breaking the shells of society, the eggshells of society, not their own. And I think if you can also maybe see people's irrational behavior as maybe being pushed in some way beyond their own immediate well-being. So what do you want to say to that?
It's a complex argument, but it's really a wonderful hint. And first thing that I got is that we all know that there is not, we could say, a really straight line, definite one between what would be sometimes madness or what would be sometimes, we could say, sanity. This is something that even some really good names of psychiatry or psychotherapy told us. I'm thinking about Franco Basaglia, for example. I mean, they wrote really wonderful pages about this. And the first thing that I got in mind is an old quote that my ex-girlfriend used to tell me in Romanian. It's called, they say, unde minte și prostie. It means where there is mind, there is also stupidity. So it means that sometimes in order to develop something genius, something that has really a powerful value, there needs to be a component of breaking up, we could say, the actual state of thing. And this is also the metaphor of Tagore. Of course, there must be a limit. I mean, because when this arrives to the point, as we were saying, the metaphor of the fiddle of appetites, when these arrive to the point where it's the appetite that is controlling you, and it's not you that are controlling the appetite, or that you are driven, but in a kind of a rational,
but that's what I was thinking, because with
way, this becomes toxic. Because in this way, this actually falls on one of the previous examples that we had, which is this becomes a case of a prison of self.
Yeah, but I hear you, it makes sense. But I mean, if I look at these artists, and that's why I called them madmen, and I'm not, you know, everybody else did too, they were in control of, they were not in control of their appetites. Their appetites were controlling them. This insane need to paint, even in the course of self-destruction.
Yeah.
So it was really taking over. You know, they were not sitting there in control of their appetites. That was gone. And so I just find it interesting if you know, we have to see beyond maybe just our own well-being. That's why I was saying he's breaking the shells of society, not his own eggshell.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was just a comment, really.
No, but it was really interesting. The fact is that behind everything, there may be really tons of motivations as well. So people may want to break the shell of society because they think that they can build a better one on certain aspects. Some people may just want to break the shell of society because they want to see the world burn. And there's where the limit becomes really
That's good.
difficult
That's
to
good.
trace.
Yeah, no, that's very good, because they were all motivated to move the world forward and not to just burn it up.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Thank
the
you.
thing. Very good. Nice.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Again, what a wonderful presentation. I'd like to direct everyone's attention to Dr. Cohen's comments in the chat. Wonderful presentation. Metaphors can be highly uplifting. As spurs to guiding virtues, their aspirational and empowering nature can be highly valuable in promoting constructive change.
Yeah.
Okay.
100% I quote. Totally agree.
All right. At this point, where it's time for the next session, so we'll be moving on. Let me get to the page. Our first speaker is Guy Duplessis. Now, I hope I said your last name correctly. I'm sorry if I didn't. His title is Philosophical Psychotherapy, Logic-Based Therapy in the Treatment of Addicted Populations. A little